Okay, so let's get started. Um, so yesterday we talked about noise pollution and what neighbors' rights are as far as preventing noise, which we had seen before. Bottom line is that you can defer to the city's noise ordinances and you are completely in the right as a neighbor who wishes another neighbor to comply with the city ordinance. Okay, next. Chatzar hashutfin. Now, but barring that, let's say it's in the middle of the day. The only time a neighbor has a right to demand quiet is if he physically is ill, and his illness will be exacerbated by the noise. Then he has a halachic right to demand. Now, he has to be able to demonstrate that. In other words, if anyone who knows this halacha would say, "Oi, I get such headaches. This person is making my life miserable." So the base then would have to make an assessment, is this person truly ill or not? Okay. Okay.
There's a time element here, like we're gonna talk about after that on tonight.
Right. So that we discussed yesterday. We said that,
Mhm.
the bottom line is that even though that's the time limit is not specified by the Gemara, or by the poskim, but you do what basically is the standard of the community. And every neighbor has to comply with the community standard. So if there's a city ordinance, that becomes the community standard. Okay. Now, chatzar hashutfin sheyesh badin chaluka. So now we're going to talk about, we talked about auditory noise. Now we're going to talk about ocular noise, or damage, which is someone is damaging me by looking into my property. So there is such a concept of that in halacha as well. Chatzar hashutfin sheyesh badin chaluka o shechilkua biritzona. If you have a courtyard that could, in theory, be divisible, or let's say two homeowners have divided this courtyard among themselves. Even when it normally would not be large enough to be divisible. That each neighbor has the halachic right to coerce his neighbor to join him in the construction of a wall or fence that blocks the vision from one to the other. A privacy wall, exactly. Vafilu amdu kach shanim rabos below mechitza, kofehu lasos mechitza b'cholei sheyirtza. And even if the courtyard had been without a wall for many years, you still have a right to demand to put up a wall. So let's say I buy someone's home and he had a relationship with his neighbors such that they didn't really mind, you know, their kids grew up together and their kids played in the yard together and they didn't really feel they needed a fence. But now the neighbor is older and this is a new family that comes in, and the wife wants to sunbathe in the backyard, and she feels there's a creepy old man next door, and she feels self-conscious if she's going to be sunbathing with the neighbors looking on, and they want to be able to have barbecues with their friends, and they don't want to have to share the backyard anymore. So halachically, this new neighbor can demand to join forces to construct a wall. ואפילו יש מנהג בעיר שלא לעשות, so אין הולכים אחרי המנהג בזה. And even if the community standards is to have open yards, okay, you still do not have to comply with the community standard. In other words, there are certain neighborhoods, I'm thinking about, more rural areas, in middle America, let's say, where neighbors don't have fences and don't have walls between them, because they have sprawling yards. And it's not always practical because it's, a large area and people are more home style, you know. But if this neighbor says, I need my privacy, even if that's not the standard, you have to comply with that. So you can coerce your neighbor to participate in the building of a wall, unless the neighbor can convince you to be moichel on the fact that you're not going to have privacy in your yard. V'yesh edim shemachlu al kain, shuv ein yicholim lachzor v'limchos echad al hasheni. And furthermore, if there are witnesses who can testify that you already said it's okay, we don't need a wall, you can't then change your mind later and say, I demand a wall. In other words, once you're moichel, once you are formally moichel on the wall, on the privacy issue, you can't now change your mind, which is an interesting thing because I could definitely hear the contra. I could hear, what if a neighbor said, well, initially I wanted to be a good neighbor, I didn't want to make waves. And then all of a sudden, every time I'm outside, I find my neighbor staring at me, or something like that, which makes me very uncomfortable. Okay. So why can't a person say, I know initially that I was moichel on privacy, but now I realize this guy's a creep, and what do they call it? The guy with the peeping tom, whatever, and it makes me feel very uncomfortable. So
what happens if he has a dog and he's all over his yard, type of thing, same thing?
Well, that's a more direct form of damage. That would be even here we're talking about damage that's caused by an invasion of privacy. When when a neighbor's animal comes and damages my property, my flower bed or whatever it is, then certainly I have a right to demand that he stop his dog from coming on my property. And furthermore, I can sue him for damages to whatever extent that the damage has already been done. So what's the source for this? So it's right at the very beginning of the Gemara in Bava Basra. Hashutfin sharatzu lasos mechitza b'chatzer bonin esakosel be'emtza. That if you have partners who want to be able to divide a courtyard and have a wall between them, they build it in the middle. Shenagu livnos ba'avnei gvil or ba'avnei gazis hakol keminag hamadina. And whatever standard is considered to be an acceptable partition, that's what they have to put up, for whatever reason. The Gemara disputes, is visual damage considered to be a legitimate claim of damage, where my privacy has been invaded through your looking. ולכן למאן דאמר אין שמי הזק, אין אחד יכול לחלוף את חברו להשתתף עמו בבניין קייסל מחיצה שביניהם כדי שלא יראו זה זה. According to the opinion that visual damage is not considered to be real damage, then I can't coerce my neighbor to participate in the building of a fence, which is meant for privacy. V'yachol omer lo daili lechalik b'mechitza kala shel eitzim shetukum ba'aretz ve'in tzricham lios gavohim ala nemochim ve'in hashenu yachol liton eini chafet shetira iski. And therefore, even if they agree that they're going to divide the yard, right, and put up a divider between them, if you hold that visual damage is not a legitimate claim, then the neighbor who wants to go at it on the cheap can say, let's just put up posts every few yards to demarcate the division of our property. Or let's put up a chain link fence, which is, you can completely see through it. That's much cheaper than putting up a wall, okay, a privacy wall. So according to that opinion, Va'ayin Rashi, Daya lechalka me sipas shaleitzim tekuim baretz nemochim lo kaifinan leivein zeyachalomer lo any chafesh shetira iski. And just quotes Rashi, who says basically the same thing. However, that's only according to that opinion in the Gemara. But ulamanda Amar hezek riyah shemei hezek. But if you hold that visual damage is a legitimate claim, then kofin zeh lasos mechitza gemura kidei sheyalo yachol echad lirot et chavero. Then you could coerce your neighbor to pay for a real privacy wall, which is usually going to be more expensive. Ula halacha, and how do we paskin? Pasak Rambam behilchos shchenim hezek riyah shmei hezek. That it is a legitimate claim, it is a form of damage. V'lachein pasak chatzer hashutfin sheyesh badim chaluka או שחילקוה ברצונם, ישלחו לחם הם לחופש חבר לבנוס הכוסל באמצע, כדי שלא יראה חברו בשש שמשתמש בחלקו, שהזק ישמי הזק. Rambam says that each neighbor can coerce the other to put up a real privacy wall. Afal pi shamdu kach shanim rabos below mechitza, kofehu lasos mechitza b'chol yirze. Even if many years had gone by without a wall, each neighbor can coerce the other to put it up. Now, he quotes then the Tur in the Shulchan Aruch, who say the same thing. I'm just scanning through it. Right, and he quotes the source for saying that you don't follow the standard of the city if a person feels that their privacy is being violated. But then he quotes the Rush and Rabbeinu Yerucham, who say, "Aval imachalu zel zel hezakaria," but if each neighbor had already foregone and was forgiving and said, "It's okay, we don't mind if we look into each other's yard," v'yesh edim shemachalu al kach, and there are witnesses that they each forgave each other. Shuv einam yicholim lachzer bahem v'limchos echad al hasheni. Then you can't come back again and say, I changed my mind. Vafilu ein sarich, vafilu, sorry, there's a word missing here. Shekiven shenischayvu bekosol hareza kemi shenischayv lo mana, umachalo shezacha b'mechilasa below kinyan. The word kinyan is missing. Vafilu kinyan ein sarich. You don't even need a kinyan to show that there was a forgiveness. Because if I just verbally tell you, I forgive you the debt that you owe me, the debt is off. And so therefore, when I tell you, I forgive you that you don't have to pay for offense, the debt is off. The Ramah brings this lahalacha. I think we do have a principle that mechila bito slav shmei mechila. If a person forgives something under false pretenses, though, for example, let's say a person said when he first moved in, sure, it's okay, we don't need a wall between us. But that's because I didn't realize how nosy the neighbor was. Mm-hmm. I think the Ramah would agree that in that kind of situation, even though there are witnesses who said that the guy was moichel, you could say, I was moichel without information. I should have said, you're right. I should have said, let's wait and see. Let's wait and see how things go. But as a new neighbor, I wanted to be conciliatory and friendly and all of those other things. And that's why I was willing to forgive things. I mean, you could definitely hear such an argument. Mm-hmm. That would be my only rejoinder to that last statement. Okay.
What happens if the neighbor has 10 kids and you can't afford building the fence? Doesn't have the money to basically knows they can't. So one neighbor that can do it is the fence you do, the other neighbor doesn't have the money to do it.
I had a situation like that. I had a neighbor years ago when I was much younger, living in San Diego. We had a modest home, and the neighbor was getting annoyed because our kids were throwing balls in his backyard. So he said, and I guess they didn't like the noise either because my kids would run around in the backyard. So he said, I want to put up a fence. I said, great. But then he showed me the bill. And I said, I don't have the money. I can't afford that. So he decided to build the fence without our putting in the money. But he built it in such a way where the backside of the fence was facing our property. In other words, normally when you build a wood fence, there's usually a front and a back. Do you know what I mean? In other words, the front is just plain slats, and the back has a frame to support the slats. And usually when two neighbors build a fence like that, every 10 feet or so, you switch it. You alternate. But that's when both neighbors are paying for it. And I told him, I'm really sorry, but I can't afford it. So, but halachically, he could have said, I'm sorry, but I'm going to take you to court, because halachically he could have sued. Not that they were Jewish, they weren't Jewish, but what are you going to do?
He didn't pay.
So I ended up not
The
paying.
way he did it was
Yeah,
reasonable.
but
that you
it's
get
reasonable because he paid for it, right?
He paid for it.
Yes.
So the back facing
I
methodology.
mean, the back
was reasonable.
facing didn't bother me. Yeah.
So you got something out of the fact that you didn't pay by having it nice all the way along on the side.
I mean, he benefited,
I'm saying he benefited by that
right?
in deference to the fact that you didn't get your contribution.
That's right.
You also benefit too, because you got some more privacy from your neighbor.
Oh, they were empty nesters. They didn't bother us at all. It was we who were bothering them. Yeah. And I could definitely understand, his desire to do it.
Particularly now,
I was barely scraping by. Yeah.
ages and stages.
Yeah.
Well, luckily you're not expected to pay.
Halachically, I would be on the hook to pay. Yeah. And what
Even with the
the
boy.
I think so. Yeah, I don't think there's any difference between a Jew and a non-Jew in this respect.
I'm not sure if the secular law is the same. I mean, yeah, if a court orders you to put up a fence, you have to put up a fence.
And we must have municipal laws that does that, right? When the neighbor putting it up, or is it up to the neighbor who wants to put it up, they have to pay.
I think it's, if there's, wants to clear it up, pays for it. Yeah. But if you're creating a nuisance and the court says, like, put up a fence, you'd have to put up a fence.
Right.
Pay for it.
Right. So what we could have done is I could have told him, I can't afford it. I guess I'll have to owe you the money and pay you off every month or whatever it is. But he said, no, I'd rather just do this.
What if that would have, as you said, it might not be very aesthetically pleasing, so that if you were going to sell your house, that could have affected the value of your house and the way that fence looked, if it didn't look very nice there because of the slabs, I don't know if that would be a factor too.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it could have been a factor. I don't know. We didn't have any problem selling the house. But thank Yeah. Yeah, I should have held on to it. The truth is, I should have held on to it and just rented it out. But
Values really went up.
yeah. But what did we know? We were young and dumb. Yeah.
We couldn't afford to hold on to it at that point anyway, so.
Well, I mean, if I would have been more of an enterprising young man, I would have looked for a tenant. I mean, I had a tenant for a while, and tenant was a flake, and just packed up in the middle of the night and left. And I was getting nervous because I was living on the other side of the country by then, and I just said, forget this, and I just put it up for sale.
We had the same sort of thing with the bungalow down south that would have gone for a huge amount, but we just didn't want the hassle. We just sold it,
Yeah. And of course, it would be worth a fortune today. Yeah.
leaving the land alone.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on. What if the neighbor doesn't protest? Does he have a right to protest in the future? Adam ha'oseh is a malacha b'reshus shelo. So a neighbor has been doing work on his property, and that work can occasionally cause either a nuisance or damage. Kagon, the Chachamim say that certain types of labor have to be distanced from the neighbor a certain number of feet or amos, because either of the offensive odor or because the vibrations of the machinery, or because of the materials that are used can seep into the ground and cause damage. Okay, so in all of those situations, my neighbor started work, and I said nothing. Okay, even though I had a legal right to force him to move his operation further away from the property line, or I had a right to stop him completely. Let's say, even though halachically I would normally have to move this, the neighbor would normally have to distance this work from the wall, the adjoining wall, right? And because let's say he's doing work that creates vibrations, and you do it right near a wall, it's going to weaken the foundation of the wall, and the wall will eventually collapse, or it'll accelerate the collapse of the wall. Okay, but instead of the neighbor making a fuss and protesting, vishasak chavera, the neighbor doesn't say anything. He says, you don't hear from him at all. Okay, so remember, usually silence is tacit approval. Okay, hareze mochal ve'eno yochol lachzor lahatzricha laharchik. So silence is a sign of forgiveness in halacha, that if the neighbor says nothing, even though his neighbor is doing something which is harmful to him and his property, v'hu shara mimenu shemachal, kagon shesiyeya imo miyad o shamar lo lalos o shara she'asa bitzido below harchaka v'shasak below hikbet al zeh. However, the proviso is that you have to have evidence that the neighbor's silence was an act of mechila. Meaning that if the neighbor can turn around later and say, what do you mean I didn't say anything? I was in Florida for 6 months. Or what do you mean I didn't say anything? I was in the hospital and I didn't know what you were doing because you were doing it so covertly. I had no idea what was going on. So you have to have evidence that he was moichel. What are some examples? He comes over one day and he helps you set up the machinery right up against the property line. Or the neighbor says, sure, set it up. Or the neighbor sees that you're setting up your operation and he doesn't say anything. Okay? Shuv eno yochel limchos. Then he can no longer protest. Aval lechatchila yochel la'akev alav shelo yasa. But lechatchila, the neighbor does have a right to say, no, I'm sorry, this is going to be injurious to my property or to me. I don't want you to set this up. Now, what if the guy is under a false understanding? Let's say he sees you setting something up. It looks innocuous to him because he has no idea what this thing is. You're setting up some kind of shed near his property, near the property line. He doesn't realize that inside that shed, you're going to be, it's your man cave, and you're going to be blasting music out of your man shed because your wife won't let you, or you're going to be smoking stinky cigars in your man cave, in your man shed, because your wife won't let you smoke inside the house. In the meantime, all of the smoke billows over to the neighbor, right? He didn't realize it. He thought you're going to build a man shed to hang out and be quiet. He doesn't realize that there's a lot of stuff going on there that's going to be offensive. So that just because he didn't say anything and he just said, "Oh, cool, you're building a man shed to escape your family every 5 minutes," he thought that was pretty cool. But what he didn't realize is that there was going to be some kind of pollution, whether noise, visual, smoke, vibrations, or whatever. So then, as soon as he discovers the source of damage, he still has a right to protest. But if he completely saw your operation and said, yeah, it's totally fine, don't worry about it, so then he can't be moichel afterwards.
Secular law is exactly the thing, a waiver. In order to waive your legal rights, you have to know that you have legal right, and you have to give up on it so intentionally because you're giving up your legal right. It can't be for another reason. Right? So that's what waiver is.
That's
Yeah.
even stronger because you have to know. In Torah case, do you have to know that your acquiescence is going to allow it to continue? Or is that just the way it is?
Does a person, does he have to know the halacha?
Yeah. That's what it sounds like Margaret is
You have
saying
to-
about the law.
When you're not, like you're not opposing, objecting to the conduct, you have to say, you have to be held to understand that you know that you have a right to object for legal grounds, but you're not doing it because you don't really care. Right?
That's naturally though, but it doesn't sound like.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether in halacha ignorance could be a valid claim, ignorance of the law. because it would seem to me that that's sort of implicit that every neighbor should know that he has rights.
Because what
You-
Marvin is describing sounds more like, if you break Shabbos, you have to know the
You're right,
consequences and all that stuff.
right,
It doesn't
right.
sound like that's.
I
what
don't
we-
think it's like Shabbos where you can claim I was a shogeg because I didn't know the laws of Shabbos.
Yeah.
Like a guy's living with his neighbor for 10 years, and then one day in shul, someone tells him, "You mean your neighbor's been doing that and it doesn't bother you?" He said, "Yeah, it bothers me, but I got used to it." And the friend tells him, "You have a right to protest." So I don't think that that's going to be a valid argument. The guy just wakes up one day and realizes that he has a right to protest.
That's what it seems like it differs.
Yeah, I
So
went.
how does it work if a neighbor smokes a lot of pot in his backyard, forget about building, and then you're next door with your young kids, do you have a say? of what's
You
going
live in a
on?
high rise, so to speak.
Maybe how we are.
That's a joke.
Well,
Not a very good one.
I think that there's a right of that a neighbor has a right to say that this is creating smell pollution. This is creating pollution in my area. I mean, I don't know, what are the effects of secondhand pot smoke? Can you get high from secondhand pot smoke?
But just the smell and again, family and stuff, like, any legal stuff you can do with that, or just,
I mean, there are bylaws that say, let's say outside buildings, you can't be 9 meters, 9 meters away or whatever, but for private, if the smell really bothers you, it could be a nuisance.
do something about it?
I remember a few years back when we were learning some of these halachas, one of the people here asked if I know my neighbor is selling illicit drugs, am I allowed to say anything about it? Because he's attracting a certain element, like at 2 a.m, to come into the neighborhood and come onto the street. And I said, in that case, you certainly have a right. Yeah, there's no law of Masira. If a person is flagrantly violating the law of the land, there's no law that says that you can't squeal on a fellow Jew. That's something a little bit different here. Now, pot is legal. And so I think you're going to have a harder case saying that this is offensive to you because it now becomes a community accepted standard. It's like saying, I don't like the noise that's coming from your washing machine. Well, it's a regular washing machine. Maybe it's not the quietest model, but it's not making abnormally loud noise. Well, but I have a 90-year-old mother and she needs to have absolute quiet. That's not a legitimate argument. You can't make that argument. Um, uh, we did say that if a person is ill and you can demonstrate physical damage to the patient through the noise, then sometimes the Beis Din will take that into consideration, but it has to be within reason.
So the person that's selling illicit drugs, your neighbor, you have to warn him first, or this is a fellow Jew, or just?
No, I don't think you have to warn him, because warning him could be dangerous. Let's say you want to give the police an anonymous tip. If the guy finds out that you squealed on him, maybe he'll sick one of his junkie friends on you. You don't know. So I wouldn't advise someone to warn his neighbor first
In this situation.
in this situation, yeah. And nor are you required to by halacha. If a person's flagrantly violating the Dina de Malchusa, I mean, all bets are off. And he's doing something that is harmful to the community. Okay. Now, whenever we say that silence is a tacit forgiveness, hainu b'sha'ar nezikim, that's with other sources of damage. Aval b'dvarim hamavim asham avak beruach metzuya, but when it comes to smoke and dust, umazikim livnei adam oler rechusham, and it's causing damage either for people's lungs or for their property. Oh, reach beis hakisei, or if there's a person sets up an outhouse on his property and it's causing an offensive odor, shetzarach kedei laharche kedei shelo yavo reach ra l'shcheno, where the halacha requires the neighbor to distance the outhouse so far that it doesn't emit an offensive odor to his neighbor, or if it's going to cause vibrations, okay, through the operation of machinery, the neighbor sets it up nearby a wall, such as a mill or a sewing machine that makes a lot of noise and vibration. And the wall can get damaged, or if it causes physical pain, then even if the neighbor is quiet for many years, then the neighbor can all of a sudden lodge a new protest. In other words, when the damage is so clearly identifiable, then the neighbor's silence, even if it was for years, the neighbor can say, I was younger and I was able to tolerate it. I'm getting older, I can't tolerate it anymore. And the same thing will be true with visual damage. Even though we said previously, if the neighbor is moichel, he can't then later protest. But it could be when the function of the backyard changes, then the neighbor does have a right to protest. Now, at face value, this contradicts the previous halacha, so we'll have to look at the notes next week to see how we reconcile.